I bought a house for my grandchildren, but when I got sick, they sent me to a... I'll write the first part now and can continue with additional parts as needed. I bought a house for my grandchildren, but when I got sick, they sent me to a... The day I signed the papers to buy the Hamilton house was the proudest moment of my life. It stood on Maple Street, a stately Victorian with gingerbread trim, bay windows, and a wraparound porch perfect for summer evenings. It wasn't the house itself that filled me with such satisfaction, though it was beautiful, with its hardwood floors and leaded glass windows, but what it represented: security for my family, a legacy to pass down, roots that would anchor my grandchildren to something lasting in this uncertain world. "Are you sure about this, Richard?" my friend Harold had asked when I told him my plans. "That's a significant portion of your retirement savings." "I've never been more certain of anything," I'd answered without hesitation. "Margaret and I always dreamed of providing for the children this way." Margaret, my wife of 42 years, had been gone for 3 years by then. Pancreatic cancer, swift and merciless. We'd planned our retirement meticulously, decades of careful saving and prudent investments. But in the aftermath of her passing, those plans seemed hollow. What good was financial security if you had no one to share it with? So when my son David mentioned that he and his wife Jennifer were struggling to find a suitable home for their growing family in today's brutal housing market, I knew immediately what I wanted to do. David and Jennifer had 3 children: Emma, age 10, Michael, 7, and little Sophie, just 3. They lived in a cramped 2-bedroom apartment, the children sharing a single room divided by bookcases and tension. David worked as an architect, Jennifer as a nurse. Both had good jobs, but between student loans, childcare costs, and the astronomical housing prices in our area, home ownership seemed perpetually out of reach for them. "Dad, we can't accept this," David had protested when I first proposed buying them a house. "It's too much." "It's not a gift. It's an investment in our family," I'd insisted. "I'll maintain ownership for now, but the house will pass to you and the children eventually. Think of it as receiving your inheritance early when you need it most." After weeks of discussion and several meetings with my financial advisor and a family attorney, David and Jennifer had relented. We found the perfect house together, large enough for their family to grow, in a neighborhood with excellent schools, with a backyard where the children could play. I paid cash, liquidating a significant portion of my investments to do so. But the joy on my grandchildren's faces when they explored their new home made every penny worthwhile. "Grandpa, I have a window seat in my room," Emma had exclaimed, her eyes shining with delight. "And there's a tree right outside where birds make nests." "My room has a secret closet," Michael had added, pulling me by the hand to show me the small storage space built under the eaves. Even little Sophie had understood the significance of the moment, running from room to room shouting, "Our house! Our house!" That had been nearly 2 years ago. I'd kept my own modest ranch-style home, a few miles away from the Hamilton house. Close enough to visit often, but far enough to give David and his family their privacy. The arrangement worked beautifully. I joined them for Sunday dinners, attended school performances and soccer games, and occasionally stayed over in the guest room when bad weather made driving home inadvisable. In return, they included me in their lives in ways that filled the void Margaret's death had left. Emma would call to discuss the books we were both reading. Michael sought my help with his model airplanes, a hobby I'd enjoyed since childhood. Sophie would climb into my lap and demand stories from the olden days, her term for tales of my own childhood. David consulted me on household repairs, and Jennifer often passed along containers of homemade soup or casseroles, claiming she'd accidentally made too much. It wasn't perfect, no family is, but it was good. The kind of good I'd hoped for when I signed those papers, until it wasn't. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in April. I was in my garden, turning the soil for spring planting, when a wave of dizziness struck me so suddenly I had to sit down on the damp ground. It passed quickly, and I dismissed it as a combination of the unusually warm day and my 73-year-old body protesting the exertion. The second incident occurred a week later. I was having breakfast with David and the children. Jennifer was working a night shift at the hospital, when my right hand suddenly refused to cooperate. The fork I was holding clattered to the plate, and when I tried to reach for my water glass, my arm moved in an odd, jerky motion. "Dad?" David had asked, his forehead creased with concern. "Are you okay?" "Just a cramp," I'd said, flexing my fingers as sensation returned. But I'd seen the worry in his eyes, and it mirrored my own uneasiness. The falling came next. Once, while walking to the mailbox. Again in the bathroom, where I struck my head on the edge of the sink and ended up with an impressive bruise along my temple. A third time at the grocery store, causing enough of a scene that the manager insisted on calling an ambulance despite my protests. That landed me in the hospital, where a series of tests revealed the truth I'd been trying to ignore. Parkinson's disease. The neurologist was kind but direct. "We caught it relatively early," Dr. Mehta had explained. "There are excellent medications to manage the symptoms, and physical therapy will help with balance and mobility. But you should know that this is a progressive condition. It will get worse over time." I'd nodded, thinking of my father who had suffered from the same disease in his final years. I remembered how his hands had trembled, how his once confident stride had deteriorated into a shuffling gait, how frustration had often overwhelmed him when his body refused to obey his mind's commands. "What about living independently?" I'd asked, the question that concerned me most. Dr. Mehta had smiled encouragingly. "Many people with Parkinson's live on their own for years with proper support. Eventually, you may need assistance, but that could be a decade away, depending on how quickly your disease progresses." I'd clung to that reassurance in the days that followed, as I adjusted to new medications and learned to navigate a world that suddenly seemed filled with potential hazards. Throw rugs became treacherous. Stairs required careful negotiation. Even something as simple as carrying a cup of coffee from the kitchen to the living room became a precarious operation. David and Jennifer insisted I tell them about every fall, every episode of dizziness, every medication adjustment. Their concern was touching, if sometimes overwhelming. Emma researched Parkinson's for a school science project, presenting me with a carefully constructed poster explaining the disease in terms a fifth grader could understand. Michael began automatically taking my arm when we walked together, his small hand steady against my increasingly unreliable balance. Even Sophie, in her 5-year-old wisdom, seemed to understand that Grandpa needed a bit more patience these days. For 6 months, we managed well. I hired a cleaning service to come twice a week, relieving me of tasks that had become difficult. A physical therapist visited my home regularly, guiding me through exercises designed to maintain my mobility. David installed grab bars in my bathroom and replaced the knobs on my kitchen cabinets with handles I could manage more easily. Then came the fire. It wasn't dramatic. No roaring flames or collapsing beams. Just a pot of soup left on the stove when a medication-induced doze overtook me in my favorite chair. The smoke detector's shrill alarm woke me, and I managed to turn off the burner and open windows before any serious damage occurred. But the scorched pot and smoke-stained ceiling were evidence enough of what might have happened. David arrived, 20 minutes later, responding to the automated alert from my smoke detector. He surveyed the kitchen, his face pale. "Dad, you could have been killed," he said quietly. "But I wasn't," I pointed out, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "It was a simple mistake, one anyone could make." "Not anyone," David insisted. "Someone whose medications cause sudden drowsiness shouldn't be cooking alone." I couldn't argue with his logic, but I bristled at the implication. "So what's your solution? I stop cooking? Order takeout for the rest of my life?" David ran a hand through his hair. a gesture so like my own that it momentarily distracted me from my irritation. "I don't know," he admitted, "but we need to figure something out. This can't happen again." That evening began a series of family discussions about my situation. Words like assisted living and retirement community were introduced cautiously, always followed by assurances that they were just options to consider, not decisions being made. Jennifer brought home brochures from various facilities, which I refused to look at. "I'm not ready for that," I insisted. "I'm still capable of living independently with some support." "Of course you are, Dad," David would agree. "We're just exploring all possibilities." But I noticed other changes. David or Jennifer began calling every morning and evening, ostensibly to chat, but clearly checking that I was all right. One of them would happen to drop by when I was scheduled to take my medications, watching to ensure I took the correct pills. Invitations to dinner at their house increased, along with offers to have me stay overnight in the guest room. Their concern was reasonable, their intentions good. But with each new restriction, each additional check-in, I felt my independence slipping away. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd bought the Hamilton house to give my family freedom, and now my own was being steadily curtailed. The breaking point came 3 months after the kitchen incident. I'd been having a particularly good week, with minimal tremors and improved balance. Feeling confident, I decided to attend Emma's school concert on my own rather than waiting for David to pick me up as planned. It was a simple miscommunication, or so I thought. I called and left a message that I'd meet them at the school, then drove myself the familiar route. The concert was lovely, Emma's flute solo earning a standing ovation from proud parents and grandparents. Afterward, I waited in the lobby for my family to find me. Instead, a frantic David burst through the doors, his face ashen. "Dad, where have you been? We went to your house and you weren't there. We've been calling for an hour." I patted my pocket, realizing I'd left my cell phone on the charger at home. "I'm sorry, son. I thought you got my message about meeting here." "Message? What message?" David pulled out his phone, checked it, and shook his head. "There's no message, Dad." I frowned, certain I'd called him. "I left it on your voicemail." Jennifer appeared then, ushering the children toward us. "Oh, thank goodness," she said, the relief evident in her voice. "Richard, we were worried sick." "I left a message," I repeated, beginning to doubt myself. Had I actually made the call, or just thought about making it? Memory lapses weren't uncommon with Parkinson's, though they weren't among my usual symptoms. The drive home was tense, with David following behind my car all the way to my driveway. Once inside, we checked my phone together. There was no record of a call to David that evening. "I must have forgotten," I admitted, embarrassed and unsettled. "I was sure I called." David and Jennifer exchanged a look I knew too well, concern mingled with determination. It was the same look they gave the children when a difficult decision had been made. "Dad, we think it's time to talk seriously about your living situation," David began. "My living situation is fine," I said firmly. "One mistake doesn't mean I need to be shipped off to a facility." "No one's shipping you anywhere," Jennifer interjected gently. "But we're worried. The fire, the falls, and now this confusion. It's concerning." "I'm not confused," I insisted, though a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that perhaps I was, just a bit. "And I'm certainly not ready for assisted living." "What about a compromise?" David suggested. "What if we convert our basement into an apartment for you? It's already got a bedroom and bathroom. We could add a small kitchenette. You'd have your own space, but be close enough that we could help if needed." I considered the proposal. The basement was pleasant enough, with large windows and a separate entrance. It would keep me near my family, especially my grandchildren. But it would also mean giving up my home, my independence, my status as the provider rather than the one being provided for. "I'll think about it," I said finally. "But no decisions tonight." They left reluctantly, extracting a promise that I would call if I needed anything during the night. I sat alone in my living room afterward, surrounded by the familiar comfort of the home I'd shared with Margaret, and wondered what she would advise in this situation. Margaret had always been the practical one, facing difficult truths head-on while I tended to look for silver linings. She would probably tell me to be realistic about my limitations, to accept help before a crisis forced the issue. But she would also understand my need for dignity, for agency in my own life. "I'm not ready to be dependent, Margaret," I whispered to the empty room. "Not yet." The next morning, I woke with a sense of resolve. I would demonstrate to David and Jennifer that I could still manage independently, with some reasonable precautions. I made a list of concessions I was willing to make: wearing a medical alert pendant, agreeing to daily check-ins, using a meal delivery service instead of cooking, even accepting a part-time caregiver a few days a week. But before I could present my plan, my body betrayed me again. I was in the bathroom when a particularly severe wave of dizziness struck. I reached for the grab bar David had installed, but my trembling hand missed its target. The fall was quick, my head striking the edge of the bathtub with enough force to momentarily blank out my vision. When consciousness returned, I found myself on the cold tile floor, blood pooling beneath my head, unable to move my left side. The medical alert pendant, which I'd agreed to wear but had left on my nightstand, was out of reach. My cell phone was in the living room. I tried calling out, but my voice emerged as a weak rasp, barely audible even to my own ears. Time became fluid, stretching and compressing in strange ways. I wasn't sure if minutes or hours had passed when I heard the front door open and Jennifer's voice calling my name. My scheduled morning check-in, I realized dimly. The rest was a blur of paramedics, hospital corridors and medical terminology. Subdural hematoma, temporary paralysis, observation, tests. When the fog finally cleared, I found myself in a hospital room with David asleep in a chair beside my bed. "Son?" My voice was stronger now, though still raspy. David jerked awake immediately, relief washing over his tired face. "Dad, you're really awake this time." "This time?" "You've been in and out for 2 days," he explained, reaching for a cup of water with a straw and holding it to my lips. "Do you remember what happened?" I took a careful sip before answering. "I fell. In the bathroom." David nodded, his expression grave. "If Jennifer hadn't come by when she did..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I closed my eyes briefly, acknowledging the truth we both understood. This fall could have been fatal. Even with prompt medical attention, I'd been unconscious for significant periods over 2 days. "How bad is it?" I asked finally. "The bleeding in your brain has stopped on its own, which is good news. The paralysis on your left side appears to be temporary. You've already shown improvement." "But Dad..." David hesitated, then continued with evident effort. "The doctors say this changes things. Your Parkinson's didn't cause the fall directly, but it was a contributing factor, and the next time could be worse." I knew what was coming, but I let him say it anyway. "You can't live alone anymore, Dad. It's not safe." I wanted to argue, to insist I could manage with more precautions, better systems. But the gravity in David's eyes, the exhaustion in the slump of his shoulders, told me this wasn't a negotiation. This was the moment when my independence would begin to slip away, not in the gradual erosion I'd feared, but in a sudden landslide triggered by one disastrous fall. "What happens now?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "You'll be here for at least another week," David explained. "Then rehabilitation, probably inpatient for a while. After that..." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We need to talk about long-term care options." "The basement apartment?" David looked away, confirming what I already suspected. The basement conversion had been a compromise predicated on a level of independence I could no longer claim. We've been researching alternatives, he said gently. There's a place called Sunny Pines. A nursing home, I interrupted, my voice flat. An assisted living facility, David corrected. With graduated care options. They have independent apartments, but also more supported living arrangements as needed. The reviews are excellent, and it's only 10 minutes from our house. I closed my eyes, feeling a wave of defeat wash over me. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. I'd bought the Hamilton house to provide security for my family, to be the patriarch who took care of everyone else. Now I was about to become the burden, the obligation, the problem to be solved. Dad? David's voice pulled me back from the edge of self-pity. I know this isn't what you wanted. It's not what any of us wanted. But we need you to be safe. I opened my eyes to see my son leaning forward, his face a mask of concern and love. This wasn't easy for him either, I realized. Making these decisions, watching his once capable father become increasingly dependent, it was its own kind of pain. I know, I said finally. Just promise me one thing. Anything. Don't tell me it's for my own good. I may be old and sick, but I'm not a child who needs to be managed. David nodded solemnly. Fair enough. No platitudes. A nurse entered then, ending our conversation, as she checked my vital signs and adjusted my IV. By the time she left, Jennifer had arrived with a bag of toiletries and clean pajamas, launching into practical discussions of immediate needs rather than long-term plans. That night, alone in the hospital room, I confronted the reality of my situation. The fall had changed everything, accelerating a timeline I'd hoped would unfold much more gradually. There would be no more pretending I could manage on my own. No more insisting on just a little more time in my cherished independence. So this is it, Margaret, I whispered into the darkness. This is how it happens. Not with a bang, but a whimper, as the poet said. I thought about the Hamilton house, standing solid and beautiful on Maple Street. It had accomplished what I'd intended, giving my family stability, providing a home where my grandchildren could grow and thrive. That wouldn't change, regardless of where I lived. But I couldn't pretend the thought of moving to Sunny Pines, or any assisted living facility, didn't fill me with dread. Not because of the place itself, which I imagined was as pleasant and well-maintained as such establishments could be. What I dreaded was what it represented, the final chapter, the acknowledgement that my life was contracting rather than expanding, that my role had fundamentally changed from giver to receiver. In the days that followed, as I progressed from hospital bed to rehabilitation facility, I maintained a stoic facade. I cooperated with physical therapists, followed doctor's orders, and nodded agreeably when David and Jennifer discussed Sunny Pines. I even agreed to tour the facility via FaceTime, making appropriate noises of appreciation as Jennifer walked me through the cheerful common areas and a sample apartment. "What do you think, Dad?" David asked afterward, his hopeful expression betraying how much he wanted me to accept this solution willingly. "It seems very nice," I replied, the bland response masking the turmoil beneath. "When can I see it in person?" Relief flooded his face. "As soon as you're cleared for a day trip from rehab. Maybe next week?" I nodded, already dreading the excursion but knowing it was inevitable. Throughout my recovery, my grandchildren visited regularly, bringing drawings, school projects, and endless streams of conversation that served as welcome distractions. Emma, now 12, was earnest and solicitous, offering to read to me or help. Me practice the exercises assigned by my physical therapist. Michael brought his latest model airplane, continuing our joint project despite the challenging environment. Sophie, the youngest at 5, was the most straightforward in her approach. "Grandpa, are you going to die?" she asked one afternoon, climbing onto the edge of my bed with casual disregard for the medical setting. "Sophie," Jennifer gasped from across the room. "That's not appropriate." I waved away her concern. "It's a fair question," I said, then turned to my youngest grandchild. "Everyone dies eventually, sweetheart. but I'm not planning to die anytime soon. Good. Sophie nodded decisively. Because I still need you to teach me checkers. Daddy doesn't play right. From the mouth of babes, as they say. Sophie's matter-of-fact acceptance of my continued role in her life, damaged but not diminished, offered a perspective I desperately needed. Perhaps my value to my family wasn't solely as provider or protector. Perhaps being simply grandpa was enough. That realization didn't magically dispel my reluctance about Sunny Pines, but it did help me approach the inevitable with a bit more grace. When the day came for my in-person tour, I made a conscious effort to look for positives rather than focusing on what the move would cost me. The facility was objectively pleasant, a modern 3-story building set on landscaped grounds with walking paths and garden areas. Inside, large windows allowed natural light to flood common spaces decorated in soothing colors. Residents moved about freely, some with walkers or wheelchairs, others seemingly as mobile as I had been before my fall. We have different levels of care, explained Melissa, the admissions coordinator guiding our tour. Our independent living apartments are for residents who can manage most daily activities, but benefit from having services available if needed. As requirements change, we can adjust the level of support accordingly. She showed us a 1-bedroom apartment in the independent living section, pointing out safety features like grab bars, emergency call buttons, and wide doorways that could accommodate mobility aids. It was small but efficiently designed, with a kitchenette, living area, bedroom, and accessible bathroom. All meals can be taken in our dining room, Melissa continued, though residents in independent living are welcome to prepare food in their apartments if they prefer. We have daily activities, weekly outings, and transportation services for medical appointments or shopping. I nodded, trying to imagine myself living in this space, taking meals with strangers, participating in organized activities designed to keep elderly minds and bodies engaged. It wasn't a horrifying prospect, certainly better than many alternatives, but it wasn't home. What do you think, Dad? David asked as we concluded the tour, his expression carefully neutral. It's very nice, I said, the same non-committal response I'd given after the virtual tour. But, David prompted, knowing me too well to be fooled by polite acquiescence. I sighed, looking around at the pleasant but institutional surroundings. It's not home, I said simply. I know, David acknowledged, his voice gentle. But it could become home, in time, and you'd be safe here, with people trained to help if you need it. I couldn't argue with his logic. The fall had proven beyond doubt that I could no longer safely live alone. My options were limited. Move in with David and Jennifer, likely disrupting their family dynamics and placing additional burdens on them. Hire full-time home care, which would be prohibitively expensive given how much of my savings had gone into the Hamilton house. Or accept this comfortable, reasonable compromise that would preserve some measure of independence while providing necessary support. How soon would I need to decide? I asked Melissa. We currently have 2 independent living apartments available, she replied. One could be ready for move-in within 2 weeks. Given your situation, coming from rehabilitation rather than another residence, we could expedite the process if needed. 2 weeks. The timeline made everything suddenly, uncomfortably real. In 14 days, I could be living here, my home. Of 40 years emptied and sold, my possessions winnowed down to what would fit in this modest apartment. I'd like some time to think about it, I said, though I knew the decision was largely made already. Of course, Melissa smiled understandingly. Take all the time you need, but do be aware that our available units tend to fill quickly. As we left Sunny Pines, I felt a weight pressing on my chest that had nothing to do with my medical condition. It was the heaviness of impending loss of my home, my independence, my identity as I'd known it for decades. We could look at other places, Jennifer offered as we drove back to the rehabilitation facility. "There's no need to rush into anything." But we all knew there was indeed a need to rush. My discharge from rehabilitation was scheduled for the following week. I couldn't return to my house alone, and the basement apartment conversion would take months to complete if we pursued that option at all. Sunny Pines seems like the best choice, I conceded, but I'd like to see a few more places before making a final decision. It was a small assertion of control in a situation where I felt increasingly powerless. David nodded, clearly relieved that I wasn't rejecting the idea outright. "We can arrange that. There are several other facilities within reasonable distance." Over the next few days, we toured 2 more assisted living centers. One was older and less expensive than Sunny Pines, but had a warmth to it that the newer facility lacked. The other was even more upscale, with amenities that reminded me of a luxury hotel rather than a care facility, but it was significantly more costly and located farther from my family. In the end, I chose Sunny Pines, not because I had fallen in love with it, but because it represented the most practical compromise among all relevant factors: location, quality of care, cost, and available services. The decision made, we set the wheels in motion for my transition from rehabilitation to assisted living. The process of dismantling my life as I had known it began in earnest. David and Jennifer spent evenings and weekends at my house, helping to sort through decades of accumulation. What would fit in the Sunny Pines apartment? What should be given to family members? What could be donated or sold? What must, regrettably, be discarded? Each decision, however small, felt weighted with significance. The recliner where I'd read bedtime stories to my grandchildren, too large for the new apartment, but perhaps David could use it in their home. The collection of vinyl records Margaret and I had gathered over 50 years of marriage, impractical now, but Emma had shown interest in vintage music. The hand-built bookcase that had been my first major woodworking project, neither particularly beautiful nor valuable, but imbued with memories of Margaret's patient encouragement as I learned the craft. "We don't have to decide everything right away, Dad," David reminded me during one particularly difficult sorting session in my home office. "Some things can go into storage until you're settled and have a better idea of what you'll want with you." I nodded, grateful for his understanding but aware that storage often became a way station to eventual disposal. Still, it was a kindness to pretend that these decisions weren't as final as they actually were. The grandchildren helped in their own ways. Emma carefully cataloged books and photographs, creating a database of what was going where. Michael tested lamps and electronics to ensure they still worked properly. Sophie's contribution was less practical, but no less heartfelt. She drew pictures of Grandpa's new house, filled with imaginary gardens, friendly neighbors, and even a swimming pool, which Sunny Pines did not, in fact, have. "This is going to be your room," she explained, pointing to a crayon creation featuring a bed, a chair, and what appeared to be a purple hippo. "And this is your special friend who will visit you." "A hippopotamus?" I asked, amused despite the circumstances. "No, Grandpa," Sophie giggled. "That's Mrs. Fletcher. She lives next door to you and brings cookies." "I see," I said solemnly. "Well, I look forward to meeting Mrs. Fletcher and her cookies." Sophie's innocent optimism about my new living situation was touching, even as it contrasted sharply with my own apprehension. In her 5-year-old mind, change was adventure rather than loss. I tried to adopt some of her perspective, to see possibilities rather than limitations. The day of the move arrived with unseasonable warmth for late October. David had hired professional movers for the few larger items that would accompany me to Sunny Pines: the bed I'd chosen from my guest room, a small writing desk, a comfortable armchair, and a bookcase filled with carefully selected volumes. Jennifer had gone ahead to the facility to supervise the placement of furniture and unpack essentials. I stood in the empty living room of my home, saying a private goodbye to the space where so much of my life had unfolded. Margaret and I had brought David home to this house as a newborn. We'd celebrated holidays, weathered sorrows, built a life within these walls. Now it would be sold, the proceeds added to what remained of my savings to fund my care in the years ahead. "Ready, Dad?" David asked gently from the doorway. "As ready as I'll ever be," I replied, taking one last look around before following him outside. The drive to Sunny Pines passed in contemplative silence. I watched familiar landmarks slide by. The park where I'd taught David to ride a bike, the ice cream shop Margaret and I had visited on summer evenings, the library where I'd volunteered after retirement. Each represented a connection to my community, ties that would inevitably loosen with this move. At Sunny Pines, a welcome committee awaited. Not just Jennifer and the grandchildren, but several staff members including Melissa from admissions, and a woman introduced as Diane, the activities director. They escorted me to my apartment, where Jennifer had worked minor miracles in creating a space that, while not my home, at least contained echoes of it. Familiar quilts adorned the bed, family photographs lined the bookcase and adorned the walls. My favorite reading lamp stood beside the armchair, and Margaret's prized porcelain bird collection had been arranged on a shelf in the living area. Even the smell was comforting. Jennifer had used the laundry detergent Margaret had always preferred when washing the linens. "What do you think, Grandpa?" Emma asked anxiously. "Do you like it?" I looked around at the care evident in every detail, at the faces of my family watching for my reaction, and summoned a genuine smile. "It's lovely," I said. "You've all done a wonderful job." Relief washed over their expressions. The children immediately launched into a detailed tour, showing me features I'd already seen during my previous visits, but now presented from their enthusiastic perspective. "This button calls the nurse if you fall down," Michael demonstrated. "And look, you can see the garden from your window." Sophie, true to form, had her own priorities. "I put a drawing in your bedroom," she informed me, "so you can see it when you wake up and remember that I love you." Those simple words, "remember that I love you," cut through the carefully maintained composure I'd held on to throughout this difficult transition. To my embarrassment, tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," I managed, pulling her into a gentle hug. "That's the best welcome gift anyone could ask for." The family stayed through dinner, joining me in the main dining room for my first meal as a resident. The food was surprisingly good, certainly better than what I'd been preparing for myself in recent months, and the staff was attentive without being intrusive. Several other residents stopped by our table to introduce themselves, their friendly overtures suggesting that socializing might be easier here than I'd anticipated. Eventually, though, visiting hours drew to a close. David and Jennifer gathered the children, promising to return the following day. Hugs were exchanged, final adjustments made to my living space, last-minute reminders delivered about medications and scheduled activities. And then they were gone, leaving me alone in my new apartment for the first night. I sat in my armchair, surrounded by carefully curated memories of my previous life, and allowed myself to fully feel the magnitude of the change I'd undergone. 2 months ago, I'd been living independently in my own home. Now I was a resident in an assisted living facility, my daily routine subject to institutional schedules, my privacy limited by necessary monitoring. My very identity shifted from provider to recipient of care. The loss was profound. Yet as I looked around at the touches of home Jennifer had so thoughtfully arranged, the photographs, the familiar objects, the drawing from Sophie proudly displayed on the nightstand, I recognized that something remained constant amidst all the change: the love of my family. I'd bought the Hamilton house to provide security for my grandchildren, to create a foundation for their future. That investment had accomplished its purpose and would continue to do so, regardless of where I lived. My role had changed, but my place in their lives remained essential, not as provider now, but as grandfather, storyteller, keeper of family history, recipient and giver of love. As I prepared for bed that first night at Sunny Pines, I found Sophie's drawing on the nightstand. It showed a figure that was clearly meant to be me, surrounded by hearts and stars, with "I love Grandpa" printed in wobbly capital letters across the bottom. Below that, Jennifer had helped her add, "Welcome to your new home." Home. The word echoed in my mind as I drifted toward sleep. Perhaps home wasn't just a physical structure of wood and stone. Perhaps it was also the web of connections that held me to this world, to David and Jennifer, to my grandchildren, to memories of Margaret, and now to this new community where I would write the next chapter of my life. It wasn't the chapter I would have chosen, but it was mine to live nonetheless. And if the love evident in Sophie's simple drawing was any indication, it might contain more blessings than I had yet imagined. The drive to Sunny Pines passed in contemplative silence. I watched familiar landmarks slide by: the park where I taught David to ride a bike, the ice cream shop Margaret and I had visited on summer evenings, the library where I'd volunteered after retirement. Each represented a connection to my community, ties that would inevitably loosen with this move. At Sunny Pines, a welcome committee awaited, not just Jennifer and the grandchildren, but several staff members including Melissa from admissions, and a woman introduced as Diane, the activities director. They escorted me to my apartment, where Jennifer had worked minor miracles in creating a space that, while not my home, at least contained echoes of it. Familiar quilts adorned the bed. Family photographs lined the bookcase and adorned the walls. My favorite reading lamp stood beside. The armchair and Margaret's prized porcelain bird collection had been arranged on a shelf in the living area. Even the smell was comforting. Jennifer had used the laundry detergent Margaret had always preferred when washing the linens. "What do you think, Grandpa?" Emma asked anxiously. "Do you like it?" I looked around at the care evident in every detail, at the faces of my family watching for my reaction, and summoned a genuine smile. "It's lovely," I said. "You've all done a wonderful job." Relief washed over their expressions. The children immediately launched into a detailed tour, showing me features I'd already seen during my previous visits, but now presented from their enthusiastic perspective. "This button calls the nurse if you fall down," Michael demonstrated. "And look, you can see the garden from your window." Sophie, true to form, had her own priorities. "I put a drawing in your bedroom," she informed me, "so you can see it when you wake up and remember that I love you." Those simple words, "remember that I love you," cut through the carefully maintained composure I'd held onto throughout this difficult transition. To my embarrassment, tears welled in my eyes. "Thank you, sweetheart," I managed, pulling her into a gentle hug. "That's the best welcome gift anyone could ask for." The family stayed through dinner, joining me in the main dining room for my first meal as a resident. The food was surprisingly good, certainly better than what I'd been preparing for myself in recent months, and the staff was attentive without being intrusive. Several other residents stopped by our table to introduce themselves, their friendly overtures suggesting that socializing might be easier here than I'd anticipated. Eventually, though, visiting hours drew to a close. David and Jennifer gathered, the children, promising to return the following day. Hugs were exchanged, final adjustments made to my living space, last-minute reminders delivered about medications and scheduled activities. And then they were gone, leaving me alone in my new apartment for the first night. I sat in my armchair, surrounded by carefully curated memories of my previous life, and allowed myself to fully feel the magnitude of the change I'd undergone. 2 months ago, I'd been living independently in my own home. Now I was a resident, in an assisted living facility, my daily routine subject to institutional schedules, my privacy limited by necessary monitoring, my very identity shifted from provider to recipient of care. The loss was profound. Yet, as I looked around at the touches of home Jennifer had so thoughtfully arranged, the photographs, the familiar objects, the drawing from Sophie proudly displayed on the nightstand, I recognized that something remained constant amidst all the change: the love of my family. I'd bought the Hamilton house to provide security for my grandchildren, to create a foundation for their future. That investment had accomplished its purpose and would continue to do so, regardless of where I lived. My role had changed, but my place in their lives remained essential, not as provider now, but as grandfather, storyteller, keeper of family history, recipient and giver of love. As I prepared for bed that first night at Sunny Pines, I found Sophie's drawing on the nightstand. It showed a figure that was clearly meant to be me, surrounded by hearts and stars, with "I love Grandpa" printed in wobbly capital letters across the bottom. Below that, Jennifer had helped her add, "Welcome to your new home." Home. The word echoed in my mind as I drifted toward sleep. Perhaps home wasn't just a physical structure of wood and stone. Perhaps it was also the web of connections that held me to this world, to David and Jennifer, to my grandchildren, to memories of Margaret, and now to this new community where I would write the next chapter of my life. It wasn't the chapter I would have chosen, but it was mine to live nonetheless. And if the love evident in Sophie's simple drawing was any indication, it might contain more blessings than I had yet imagined. My first week at Sunny Pines passed in a blur of adjustments and discoveries. I learned the rhythms of institutional living: breakfast served from 7 to 9, lunch at noon, dinner at 5:30, activities scheduled throughout the day, chair yoga in the mornings, current events discussions at 11, arts and crafts in the afternoons, movie nights on Wednesdays, bingo on Fridays, the constant presence of staff, well-meaning but inescapable, checking medications, monitoring meals, ensuring safety at every turn. It wasn't unpleasant, merely unfamiliar. After decades of setting my own schedule, following someone else's timetable felt oddly juvenile, as if I'd reverted to childhood with its structured days and gentle supervision. I participated in activities when it seemed polite to do so, though I often found myself longing for the solitude of my apartment, where I could read or watch television without the sociable chatter of fellow residents. My family visited frequently as promised. David stopped by most evenings on his way home from work, sometimes bringing one or more of the children with him. Jennifer came on her days off, often bringing homemade treats that we shared over cups of tea. The grandchildren visited on weekends, filling my small apartment with energy and noise that I welcomed despite the exhaustion it sometimes caused. "You seem to be settling in well," David observed during his visit at the end of my first week. "The staff says you're participating in activities, making friends." I nodded, not bothering to correct his optimistic assessment. The truth was more complex. Yes, I was adapting, finding ways to navigate this new environment. But settling in suggested a level of acceptance I hadn't yet achieved. And while I exchanged pleasantries with other residents, calling these brief interactions friendships seemed premature at best. "Everyone's been very kind," I said instead, which was entirely true. The staff at Sunny Pines was unfailingly patient and considerate, treating me with respect rather than the condescension I'd feared. And most of my fellow residents were friendly, if sometimes a bit too eager to share the details of their medical conditions or family dramas. "I'm glad," David said, his relief evident. "We worry, you know." "I know you do," I assured him. "But I'm fine, really. This is a good place." Another truth, though a partial one. Sunny Pines was indeed a good place, for what it was. But it wasn't home, wasn't freedom, wasn't the life I'd built for myself over 73 years. David seemed satisfied with my response, and our conversation turned to other topics: Emma's upcoming science fair, Michael's soccer team, Jennifer's promotion at the hospital. Normal family matters that momentarily allowed me to forget the abnormality of my current situation. As the weeks passed, I developed routines within the routines imposed by Sunny Pines. I learned which residents I enjoyed talking with and which I preferred to avoid. I discovered quiet corners in the common areas where I could read undisturbed. I identified which activities were worth my time. The current events discussions were often lively and intellectually stimulating, and which were not. Crafts involving popsicle sticks and glitter glue were decidedly not for me. One unexpected bright spot emerged in the form of a twice-weekly writing group, led by a retired English professor named Arthur Callahan. Arthur was about my age, with a shock of white hair and the slightly rumpled appearance of an academic who had more important things to think about than pressed trousers. He had moved to Sunny Pines 6 months earlier when macular degeneration had made living alone unsafe. "Can't see worth a damn anymore," he told me bluntly during our first meeting. "But the mind's still sharp, which is more than I can say for some folks around here." The writing group met in a small conference room off the main library area. 8 to 10 residents gathered around a table, notebooks and pens at the ready, as Arthur proposed writing prompts designed to stimulate memory and creativity. "Today we're writing about a place that shaped us," he announced at the session I first attended. "Childhood home, school, workplace, any place that influenced who you became. 10 minutes of writing, then we'll share if you're comfortable doing so." I hesitated, pen poised above the blank page. What place had shaped me most? The small town in Ohio where I'd grown up? The university where I'd met Margaret? The architectural firm where I'd spent 40 years designing buildings for others while dreaming of the perfect home for my own family? In the end, I wrote about the Hamilton House, not as it existed now, occupied by David and his family, but as I'd first seen it, a structure of promise and possibility, brimming with potential I couldn't wait to unlock for those I loved. When my turn came to share, I read hesitantly at first, then with growing confidence as I described the moment I'd known the house was right for my family, how I'd envisioned my grandchildren growing up within its protective embrace. "Very vivid imagery," Arthur commented when I finished. I particularly liked the description of light through the stained glass window creating puddles of colored sunshine on the hardwood floor. Visual writing comes naturally to you, it seems. His praise, delivered with the matter-of-fact tone of a teacher rather than the patronizing encouragement often offered to the elderly, sparked something in me, a flicker of intellectual engagement I hadn't experienced since my diagnosis. I found myself looking forward to the next session, already, considering what I might write. The writing group became a fixed point in my weekly schedule, an activity I anticipated rather than merely tolerated. Through it, I began to forge connections with other residents that went beyond superficial pleasantries. There was Elaine, a former librarian whose memory for poetry was prodigious despite her advancing dementia. Frank, a retired physician whose terse prose belied a deeply compassionate nature. Gloria, who had been a housewife her entire adult life, but wrote with the raw honesty of someone who had observed everything and forgotten nothing. They became, if not friends exactly, then companions on this journey none of us had chosen. But all of us were navigating as best we could. "You seem different lately," Jennifer remarked during one of her visits. "More, I don't know, engaged? The last few times we visited, you've been telling us about activities you've joined, people you've met." I considered her observation. "I suppose I am more engaged," I acknowledged. "The writing group especially has been good for me. Gives me something to look forward to." "I'm glad," she said, her smile warm. "We were worried you might withdraw, become isolated." "I'm trying not to," I said truthfully. "It would be easy to just stay in my apartment, but that's not really living, is it?" "No, it's not." Jennifer reached across the table to squeeze my hand. "I'm proud of you, Richard. This transition couldn't have been easy, but you're making the best of it." Her words stayed with me after she left. Was I making the best of my situation, or merely adapting to it because I had no choice? The distinction seemed important somehow, the difference between active participation in my life and passive acceptance of circumstances beyond my control. I was pondering this question the next morning when a knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. Opening it, I found a small woman with bright blue eyes and a cloud of silver hair standing in the hallway. "You must be Richard," she said without preamble. "I'm Vivian Fletcher from next door, apartment 307. I've been meaning to introduce myself, but I was visiting my daughter in Arizona for the past month. Just got back yesterday." "Nice to meet you," I replied, somewhat taken aback by her forthright manner. "Would you like to come in?" "Love to, but I'm on my way to the garden club meeting. Just wanted to say hello and give you these." She thrust a small container into my hands. "Oatmeal cookies, my grandmother's recipe. Best you'll ever taste, if I do say so myself." I stared at the container, then back at Vivian Fletcher, a sudden realization dawning. "Mrs. Fletcher? Who brings cookies?" She looked confused. "Well, yes, I do bring cookies to new neighbors. How did you know that?" I laughed, delighted by the coincidence. "My granddaughter Sophie drew a picture of my new apartment before I moved in. She included a neighbor named Mrs. Fletcher who brings cookies. She's 5. It was just her imagination, or so I thought." Vivian's face lit up with a smile that took years off her age. "Well, isn't that something? Your granddaughter must be psychic. Or maybe she just knows that every neighborhood needs a Mrs. Fletcher with cookies." "Maybe so," I agreed, charmed by her enthusiasm. "Thank you for these. I look forward to trying them." "Enjoy them with a cup of tea," she advised. "And when you've finished those, let me know. I've got a chocolate chip version that'll knock your socks off." With a wave, she was gone, leaving me standing in my doorway holding her gift. Later, as I savored one of the cookies, which were indeed excellent, with my afternoon tea, I thought about Sophie's drawing. Had it been mere coincidence that she'd imagined a neighbor who matched Vivian Fletcher so perfectly? Or was it something more? A child's intuition that I would find friendship in this new place? That life at Sunny Pines would not be the barren existence I had feared? Whatever the explanation, Vivian's appearance seemed like a good omen. And the cookies were definitely the best I'd ever tasted. Over the next few months, I settled into a routine that felt, if not exactly natural, then at least sustainable. The writing group continued to be a highlight of my week, with Arthur pushing us to explore different forms and subjects. I surprised myself by discovering a talent for descriptive prose, especially when writing about architecture or nature, subjects where my eye for detail served me well. "You should consider compiling these pieces," Arthur suggested after I'd shared a particularly vivid description of the lighthouse Margaret and I had visited on our honeymoon. "They're forming a kind of memoir, a record of the places and experiences that have shaped your life." The idea appealed to me. Not that I expected anyone beyond my family to read such a collection, but the thought of leaving behind a written record of my observations and memories gave purpose to the writing exercises. Other activities gradually found their way into my schedule. I joined a chess club that met on Tuesday afternoons, testing my rusty skills against opponents of varying abilities. I attended lectures on history and art offered by local college professors. I even, with some trepidation, tried the gentle yoga class designed for residents with mobility issues, finding that the stretches and balance exercises complemented my physical therapy regimen. My friendship with Vivian Fletcher blossomed from neighborly acquaintance to something deeper. We discovered shared interests in mysteries. She favored British cozies while I preferred American hard-boiled detectives. Gardening, though neither of us could do much more than tend a few pot plants on our small balconies. And classical music, we both had extensive vinyl collections, now mostly given away but still cherished in memory. Vivian had been at Sunny Pines for nearly 3 years, having moved there after her husband's death when maintaining their large home became too much for her. She was one of the most independent residents, still driving her own car for short distances and taking frequent trips to visit her daughters and grandchildren scattered across the country. The trick to being happy here, she told me over coffee, one morning, is to remember that this is just where you live, not who you are. Too many people move in and immediately become residents, passive recipients of care rather than active participants in their own lives. Her words echoed my earlier thoughts about the difference between adapting to circumstances and actively engaging with them. How do you avoid that trap? I asked. By continuing to make choices whenever possible, she replied promptly. Even small ones matter. What to wear, when to eat, which activities to join, and especially by maintaining connections outside these walls, family, friends, interests that have nothing to do with Sunny Pines. That's getting harder with my condition, I admitted. I can't drive anymore, can't go out alone easily. Then bring the outside world to you, Vivian suggested. Technology makes that easier than ever. My grandson set up video calls so I can see my great-grandchildren in California. I take online courses through the community college. I order books and movies that the Sunny Pines Library doesn't carry. Her advice made sense, and I began to look for ways to implement it. I asked Emma to help me set up a better video calling system on my tablet, making it easier to join family gatherings virtually when I couldn't attend in person. I subscribed to several architectural journals, maintaining my connection to the profession that had defined much of my working life. I ordered specialty coffees from a local roaster, a small luxury that distinguished my mornings from the institutional routine. These adjustments helped, creating pockets of normality and choice within the structured environment of Sunny Pines. But they couldn't erase the fundamental reality of my situation. I was still in an assisted living facility because I could no longer care for myself independently. My health was still declining, my capabilities still shrinking, my world still contracting despite my best efforts to expand it. This truth hit home most forcefully during family visits. David and Jennifer remained conscientious about including me in their lives, bringing the children at least once a week and taking me to their home for Sunday dinners when my health permitted. But I couldn't help noticing how they had to adjust their activities to accommodate my limitations. Choosing restaurants that were wheelchair accessible, scheduling outings during my good hours when medication kept my symptoms at bay, cutting visits short when fatigue overwhelmed me. The grandchildren, too, were affected by these constraints. Emma, now 13, was unfailingly patient, reading to me when my vision blurred or helping me navigate unfamiliar environments. But I saw the way her attention sometimes wandered during our conversations, the normal restlessness of adolescence chafing against the slow pace my condition imposed. Michael, 9, tried his best to include me in his interests, bringing video, games he thought I might manage with my increasingly uncooperative hands. When it became clear that I couldn't manipulate the controllers effectively, he switched to board games with large pieces I could move more easily. His adaptability was touching, but I hated being the reason he had to modify his natural exuberance. Sophie, at 6, was the least affected by my limitations, perhaps because she had the fewest memories of me before Parkinson's. To her, Grandpa had always moved a bit slowly, had always needed help sometimes. She climbed onto my lap without hesitation, chattered about kindergarten dramas, and asked me endless questions about the olden days, satisfied with whatever level of engagement I could offer. I don't want to be a burden to them, I confessed to Vivian after a particularly exhausting family outing that had left me bedridden for most of the following day. You're not a burden, she said firmly. You're family. There's a difference. Is there? Sometimes I'm not so sure. Vivian fixed me with a stern look. Richard Maitland, if one of your grandchildren became ill or disabled, would you consider them a burden? Of course not, I replied immediately. They could never be. That. Then extend the same grace to yourself that you would to them, she said simply. And remember that relationships are never one-way streets. Yes, your family gives you care and support, but you give them something equally valuable: love, wisdom, connection to their history, the example of how to face adversity with dignity. I wanted to believe her. Most days I managed to. But there were darker moments, usually in the small hours of the morning when pain kept me awake and doubts crept in. When I questioned whether my continued existence added anything of value to my family's lives. Whether they might be better off if I simply faded away, removing the complication I had become. In my most rational moments, I recognized these thoughts as depression, a common companion to Parkinson's disease. The doctors had warned me about this aspect of my condition, had prescribed medications to help manage it alongside the drugs that addressed my physical symptoms. But knowing the source of such thoughts didn't always diminish their power. What did help was writing. In those dark hours, I would often turn to my notebook, forcing myself to record observations, memories, reflections, anything to pull my mind away from the abyss of self-pity. Sometimes I wrote about Margaret, trying to capture the particular way she laughed or how her hair smelled of lavender and sunshine. Sometimes I described buildings I had designed or admired, focusing on the play of light and shadow, the harmony of proportion, the relationship between structure and surroundings. Sometimes I wrote letters to my grandchildren that I never intended to send, sharing thoughts too complex or too dark for our actual conversations. The writing wasn't therapy in the conventional sense, but it served a similar purpose, giving shape to formless fears, imposing order on chaos, creating meaning from experience. It became a lifeline, a way to navigate the increasingly treacherous waters of my condition. 6 months after moving to Sunny Pines, I suffered a significant medical setback. A particularly severe episode of dyskinesia, the involuntary, writhing movements that were a side effect of my Parkinson's medication, caused me to fall in my bathroom, fracturing my hip. The injury required surgery and a lengthy hospital stay, followed by weeks of intensive rehabilitation. During this period, I was moved from my independent living apartment to Sunny Pines skilled nursing wing, where I could receive round-the-clock care. The transition was jarring, from a space that had begun to feel somewhat like my own to a clinical environment with a hospital bed, medical equipment, and significantly less privacy. "It's temporary," David assured me when he visited after my surgery. "Just until you're strong enough to return to your apartment." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. We both knew that with Parkinson's, temporary setbacks often became permanent declines. The likelihood of returning to my previous level of functioning was slim at best. "The physical therapist says you're making good progress," Jennifer added encouragingly. "And once you're back in your apartment, we can arrange for additional support, an aid to help with daily activities, more intensive PT sessions." Again, I nodded, grateful for their optimism even as I harbored private doubts. The rational part of my mind understood that this was how degenerative conditions progressed. In fits and starts, plateaus followed by declines, each step down representing a new normal to which one must adjust. The emotional part rebelled against this reality, raging at the continued loss of function, of independence, of dignity. The children's visits during this period were carefully managed. Emma came most often, mature enough to handle the medical setting without distress. She would sit beside my bed for hours, reading aloud from books we both enjoyed, or simply keeping me company while I dozed. Michael visited less frequently and for shorter periods, his discomfort with hospitals evident despite his efforts to hide it. Sophie was brought only occasionally, her visits kept brief and scheduled during my better hours when I could interact with her more normally. "When are you coming back to your house, Grandpa?" she asked during one visit, her small face serious as she studied the various tubes and machines connected to me. "As soon as I'm a bit stronger, sweetheart," I told her, reaching for her hand with my less tremorous left one. "The doctors are helping me get better." She considered this, head tilted in that way that reminded me so much of Margaret. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes," I admitted, "but the medicine helps. When I hurt my knee at recess, Mommy kissed it, and it felt better. Sophie informed me. Should I kiss your hurt place? Tears sprang to my eyes at her innocent offer. That's very kind, Sophie, but my hurt is in my hip, under these blankets and bandages. A kiss from my hand would work just as well, though. She nodded solemnly and pressed her lips to my gnarled knuckles, her touch as gentle as butterfly wings. Better? Much better, I assured her, and in that moment, it was true. The pain receded beneath the wave of love her simple gesture evoked. During my extended stay in the skilled nursing wing, my writing became even more important. Arthur brought me fresh notebooks and visited regularly, providing prompts when my inspiration flagged and honest feedback on the pieces I managed to produce. The writing group continued without me, but members would stop by individually, sharing their work and collecting mine to read aloud at the next meeting. Vivian was a constant presence, appearing daily with homemade treats the kitchen staff pretended not to notice, news from the wider world of Sunny Pines, and unflagging optimism about my recovery. They're keeping your apartment just as you left it, she assured me. Martha from housekeeping dusts it weekly, and I water your plants. Everything will be ready when you're strong enough to return. I appreciated her confidence, even as my own wavered. The rehabilitation process was grueling, progress measured in tiny increments rather than dramatic improvements. Standing again after the hip surgery was a major milestone, but walking remained agonizingly difficult, complicated by the balance, issues and freezing episodes typical of advanced Parkinson's. You're doing remarkably well, all things considered, my physical therapist, a young woman named Alicia, told me after a particularly challenging session. Many patients with your combination of conditions wouldn't have regained this level of mobility. And yet I still can't walk without this, I replied, gesturing to the walker I now relied on for even the shortest distances. The walker is a tool, not a limitation, Alicia said firmly. It extends your capabilities, allows you to move safely and independently. That's something to celebrate, not bemoan. Her perspective was refreshing, viewing assistive devices as enablers rather than symbols of decline. I tried to adopt this mindset, to see my walker, shower chair, and other adaptive equipment as tools that expanded my world, rather than signs that my world was contracting. Sometimes it even worked. After 2 months in skilled nursing, I was finally cleared to return to my apartment, though with significant modifications to my care plan. An aide would now visit morning and evening to assist with dressing, bathing, and other personal care. Meals would be delivered rather than requiring me to navigate to the dining room. Physical therapy would continue 3 times weekly, with occupational therapy added to help me manage daily activities more effectively. The return to my apartment was bittersweet. The familiar surroundings were welcome after the clinical environment of the nursing wing, but everything was subtly different. Furniture rearranged to accommodate my walker, new grab bars installed in the bathroom, a hospital-style bed replacing my previous one. Necessary changes, all of them, but reminders nonetheless of how much had been lost. Welcome home, Vivian declared when she visited that first evening, bearing a casserole and her trademark cookies. We've missed you around here. Have I been gone that long? I asked, attempting humor. Feels like just yesterday I was doing cartwheels down the hallway, she laughed, playing along. It was your triple backflip that really impressed everyone. The judges gave you a 9.8. Only a 9.8? I was robbed. This easy banter with Vivian was one of the few interactions where I still felt fully myself. Not a patient, not a case to be. Managed, just Richard Maitland with his dry wit and occasional flashes of insight. Our friendship had deepened during my hospitalization, her daily visits providing a constancy that anchored me through the turbulent waters of recovery. I brought something else besides dinner, she said, reaching into her large handbag and withdrawing a folder. Arthur and I put this together for you. I opened the folder to find a collection of typed pages, neatly bound with a simple cover reading, Places of the Heart, Selected Writings by Richard Maitland. What's this? I asked, thumbing through the pages. Your writing group submissions. From the past 6 months, organized by theme, Vivian explained. Arthur thought you might like to see them collected this way. He said something about the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. I was touched by the gesture, by the care they had taken with my words. This must have been a lot of work. Worth every minute, Vivian assured me. Besides, it kept Arthur busy. You know how he gets when he's bored, starts correcting everyone's grammar. I laughed, picturing the irascible professor prowling the common areas in search of misplaced modifiers. Please thank him for me. I'll try to make it to the next writing group meeting if my schedule allows. He'll be pleased to hear that. Now, let's get some dinner into you before it gets cold. As we ate, Vivian filled me in on all the Sunny Pines gossip I'd missed during my absence. Who had moved in, who had moved out, some to higher levels of care, others in the only way anyone ultimately leaves a place like Sunny Pines. What changes the administration was considering for the coming year? They're talking about renovating the East Wing, she reported, passing me a roll. Adding more private rooms to the skilled nursing section and fewer semi-private ones. Apparently, there's increasing demand for private accommodations even at that care level. Makes sense, I nodded. No one wants to share a room with a stranger when they're at their most vulnerable. Exactly. Oh, and they've hired a new activities director, a young man named Marcus. Very energetic, full of ideas. He's started a men's discussion group that meets in the library on Thursday mornings. Might be worth checking out once you're up to it. I appreciated Vivian's efforts to draw me back into the life of Sunny Pines, to help me reconnect with the community I'd been part of before my setback. But the thought of rejoining group activities felt overwhelming at the moment. Even this simple dinner conversation was taxing my limited energy reserves. Sensing my fatigue, Vivian began gathering the dishes. I should let you rest. Your aide will be here soon to help you get ready for bed, yes? I nodded, embarrassed at needing such assistance but too tired to pretend otherwise. Allison comes at 8. She's very efficient. Good. I'll stop by tomorrow morning with breakfast. The cafeteria oatmeal is terrible on Wednesdays. They always overcook it. You don't have to do that, I protested weakly. I'm sure you have better things to do. Better than spending time with my favorite neighbor? Hardly. She patted my hand. Besides, I made cranberry orange muffins today, and they're much too good to keep to myself. It would be selfish not to share them. After she left, I sat in my armchair, the folder of writings on my lap. Opening it, I began to read the pieces I had produced over the past months. Descriptions of houses I had designed, memories of places Margaret and I had visited, reflections on what home truly means. Seeing them collected this way gave them a coherence I hadn't recognized when writing them individually. Arthur was right. They did form a kind of memoir, a map of my journey through life as reflected in the physical spaces I had inhabited or created. And perhaps more importantly, they represented something I could still do well despite my physical limitations. My body might betray me, but my mind, when not fogged by medication or pain, could still observe, analyze, and create. That night, as I lay in my new hospital-style bed waiting for sleep to claim me, I found myself thinking not about what I had lost, but about what remained. Family who loved me, friends who valued me, a mind that, while occasionally unreliable, still contained a lifetime of knowledge and experience worth sharing. It wasn't the life I would have chosen, but it was the life I had. And perhaps there was still something meaningful to be made from it. The following weeks brought a gradual reintegration into the routines of Sunny Pines. I resumed attending the writing group, though I now required assistance getting there and often tired before. The session concluded. I joined the men's discussion group Vivian had mentioned, finding it a welcome change from the female-dominated activities that formed much of the Sunny Pines social calendar. The men's group was small but diverse. A retired judge, a former high school principal, a Korean War veteran, an accountant who had worked into his 70s, and now me. Our discussions ranged widely, from current politics to sports to philosophical questions about purpose and legacy. The conversations were refreshingly direct, free from the social niceties that sometimes characterized mixed-gender activities at Sunny Pines. "So, Maitland, you were an architect," said Frank Donovan, the retired judge, during my first meeting with the group. "Designed any buildings I might recognize?" "Depends on where you've lived," I replied. Most of my work was commercial: office buildings, a few schools, one regional airport terminal. Nothing famous, but solid work I was proud of. "Functional rather than flashy?" suggested Harold Kim, the accountant. "Exactly." I appreciated his understanding. I always believed buildings should serve their occupants, not the architect's ego. "Hear, hear," agreed the principal, William Jackson. "I worked in a school designed by some hotshot who'd never spent a day teaching children. Looked great in architectural magazines. Worked terribly in practice. Windows that created glare on the whiteboards, hallways too narrow for class changes, acoustics that amplified every footstep and whisper." The conversation continued in this vein, each man sharing examples from his profession of form following function, or failing to. It was the most intellectually stimulating discussion I'd had in months, free from the patronizing oversimplification that sometimes characterized activities designed for the elderly. "Same time next week?" Frank asked as we wrapped up. "We're discussing how technology has changed our respective fields, for better or worse." "I'll be here," I promised, already looking forward to sharing my thoughts on how computer-aided design had revolutionized architecture, eliminating some skills while enhancing others. These small engagements, the writing group, the men's discussions, occasional concerts or lectures in the Sunny Pines Auditorium, provided structure and mental stimulation that helped counterbalance the increasing limitations of my physical condition. But the highlight of each week remained family visits, especially those that included my grandchildren. Emma, now in middle school, was developing interests that sometimes aligned with my own. She had inherited my eye for design, though her medium was fashion rather than architecture. She would bring her sketchbook when she visited, showing me drawings of outfits she had created and soliciting my feedback on proportion, balance, and visual flow. "What do you think of this one, Grandpa?" she asked one Saturday, displaying a sketch of, "Are you Mrs. Fletcher who brings the cookies?" Sophie asked immediately upon being introduced, her directness making the adults laugh. "I am indeed," Vivian confirmed, bending slightly to meet Sophie's eyes. "But you can call me Vivian, and I did bring cookies, tonight. Gingerbread men that need decorating. Would you like to help me with that later?" Sophie's eyes widened with excitement. "Yes, I'm very good at decorating. Mommy lets me do the sprinkles on cupcakes all by myself. Then I'll be counting on your expertise," Vivian told her seriously, earning a beaming smile in response. The evening unfolded with remarkable ease, Vivian fitting into the family gathering as if she'd been part of our celebrations for years. She helped Jennifer in the kitchen, discussed architecture with David, admired Emma's fashion sketches, and listened with genuine interest to Michael's detailed explanation of his latest video game triumph. By dessert time, when Sophie did indeed demonstrate her sprinkle distribution skills on Vivian's gingerbread men, it felt as if a space had always existed for her at our table. "Your family is wonderful," Vivian told me later as David drove us back to Sunny Pines. "So warm and welcoming. Sophie is exactly as charming as you described, and Emma is remarkably poised for 13. Michael reminds me of my own grandson at that age, so earnest about his interests." "They liked you too," I assured her, warmed by her appreciation of my family. "Sophie has already asked when Miss Vivian can come back." Christmas Day brought a smaller celebration in my apartment at Sunny Pines, just Vivian and me exchanging modest gifts before joining other residents in the main dining room for the holiday meal. I had given considerable thought to what might please her, eventually settling on a beautifully illustrated collection of poetry by Mary Oliver, whose work Vivian had often quoted in our conversations. "How perfect!" she exclaimed, running her fingers over the embossed cover. Oliver understands so clearly how beauty and sorrow intertwine, how paying attention to the world is itself a form of prayer. Her gift to me was equally thoughtful, a fountain pen of substantial weight and elegant design, accompanied by a leather-bound journal. "For your writing," she explained as I admired the pen's craftsmanship. "Arthur mentioned you've been working on a more structured memoir project, and I thought you deserved proper tools for the task." "It's beautiful," I said, deeply touched by her consideration. "Thank you. I'll treasure it." That evening, after the communal festivities had concluded, we sat together in my apartment, Christmas music playing softly on the radio, a small electric fireplace providing both warmth and ambient light. Outside, snow fell in large, lazy flakes, adding to the sense of peaceful isolation. "This has been a lovely Christmas," Vivian said, her head resting lightly against my shoulder. "Different from years past, but special in its own way." "Because of the charming company?" I suggested, earning a gentle poke in the ribs for my teasing. "Partly," she acknowledged with a smile, "but also because it feels, I don't know, more essential somehow. When you reach our age, when health is precarious, each celebration takes on added significance. You stop taking these moments for granted." Her observation resonated deeply. Throughout the day, I had been acutely aware of the preciousness of each moment, the taste of traditional foods, the warmth of human connection, the simple joy of giving and receiving. Experiences that might once have seemed ordinary now felt sacred, imbued with meaning precisely because of their ephemeral nature. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately," I admitted. "How different my perspective is now compared to even a few years ago. Things that once seemed vitally important, career achievements, financial security, social status, barely register anymore. And things I took for granted, health, independence, daily pleasures, now seem like the true measure of wealth." Vivian nodded against my shoulder. "It's the great paradox of aging, isn't it? As our physical capabilities diminish, our capacity for appreciation expands. We see more clearly what matters." "And what does matter in your view?" I asked, genuinely curious about her perspective. She considered the question carefully before answering. "Connection," she said finally. "To other people, to the natural world, to ideas and beauty. Everything else is just details." "Connection," I repeated, contemplating the word. "Yes, I think you're right. When I look at what gives my life meaning now, my relationship with my family, with you, with the writing group, even my ongoing dialogue with architecture through observation and memory, it's all about connection in one form or another." "Exactly," Vivian agreed. "And the wonderful thing is that while our bodies may fail us, our capacity for connection often remains intact. Sometimes it even deepens." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the snow accumulate on my small balcony, each lost in private thoughts but connected in our shared presence. The moment felt perfect in its simplicity. Two people at the end of long, separate journeys, finding comfort and understanding in each other's company. As winter gave way to spring, changes large and small reshaped our lives. Construction on David and Jennifer's new home progressed rapidly, with David bringing photographs of each stage to share during his visits. The suite designed for me was taking shape. Wide doorways, accessible bathroom with roll-in shower, thoughtful details like lowered light switches and countertops at a height convenient for wheelchair use. "We're incorporating universal design principles throughout the house," David explained, showing me the latest plans. "Not just in your suite, but everywhere. No steps between rooms, lever handles instead of knobs, good lighting, non-slip flooring. It will work for all stages of life. His enthusiasm was infectious, his pride in creating a space that would accommodate everyone's needs evident in every detail he described. I found myself increasingly drawn to the project, offering suggestions from my own architectural background and my newer perspective as someone with mobility challenges. "What about outdoor access from my suite?" I asked, studying the plans. "Would it be possible to have a small private patio? Nothing elaborate, just a place to sit outside without having to navigate through the main part of the house." David's face lit up at the suggestion. "Absolutely. We could extend the concrete pad on this side, add a pergola for shade, maybe some raised planters so you could garden sitting down if you wanted to." He began sketching rapidly, his pencil flying across the paper. "Something like this, maybe?" I examined his sketch, impressed as always by his ability to translate concepts into visual form quickly and accurately. "That looks perfect. Just big enough for a comfortable chair or two, small table, some plants. A private outdoor space would make a tremendous difference in quality of life." "Consider it done," David said, making notes on the main plans. "We'll adjust the landscaping to ensure privacy while still maintaining sightlines to the main backyard, so you can watch the kids play." These conversations, focused on practical details of future living arrangements, helped me gradually accept the inevitability of leaving Sunny Pines. The timeline was becoming more concrete. Construction would be completed by late summer, with move-in projected for early fall. David and Jennifer had already listed the Hamilton house, expecting it would sell quickly in the current market. "No pressure on your decision," David assured me repeatedly. "The suite will be there whenever you're ready, whether that's immediately, after we move, or months or even years later." But we both knew that my condition was progressing, making the transition a question of when rather than if. My off periods were becoming more frequent and lasting longer. Walking, even with the walker, was increasingly difficult. Fine motor control continued to deteriorate, affecting everything from writing to buttoning my shirts to managing utensils at meals. Vivian observed these changes with quiet concern, but without the pity I dreaded. She adapted seamlessly to my evolving needs, cutting my food when tremors made it impossible for me to manage, reading aloud when my vision blurred from medication side effects, slowing her pace to match mine during our now shorter walks in the garden. "Have you decided about moving to your son's new house?" she asked one evening as we sat on my small balcony, watching the sunset paint the sky in vivid oranges and pinks. "I think so," I said, having finally reached internal clarity on the matter. "Once construction is completed and they've settled in, I'll make the transition. Probably in October or November." Vivian nodded, her expression serene, though I thought I detected a flicker of sadness in her eyes. "That's the right decision. You'll have your family's support as your needs increase, and the grandchildren will have the gift of your daily presence." "I'll miss this place, though," I admitted. "More than I ever thought possible when I first arrived. And I'll miss our daily talks, our routines." "We'll create new routines," Vivian said firmly. "I'll visit you regularly. We can still have our Scrabble games and movie nights, just in a different setting." "You promise?" I asked, hating the vulnerability in my voice but needing her reassurance. "I promise." She reached for my hand, her touch warm and steady against my perpetual tremor. "This isn't an ending, Richard. Just a transition to a new chapter." Her words comforted me, though I couldn't quite shake the feeling that this change, necessary as it was, would fundamentally alter our relationship. Distance, logistics, my increasing dependence on others, all would create barriers that didn't exist within the contained environment of Sunny Pines. April brought a significant milestone, my 75th birthday. David and Jennifer planned a family celebration at a restaurant accessible for my needs, while Vivian organized a small gathering at Sunny Pines with members of the writing group and other friends I'd made during my time there. The family celebration was joyous if somewhat subdued by awareness of my declining health. The The grandchildren had each prepared special gifts. Emma, a hand-designed card featuring architectural elements she knew I'd appreciate. Michael, a carefully researched timeline of significant buildings completed during my lifetime. Sophie, a colorful clay sculpture she described as Grandpa and Mrs. Fletcher sitting on a bench. "Look, she even made your walker," Michael pointed out, indicating a small clay appendage next to the rudimentary bench. "And Mrs. Fletcher has her cookie basket." "It's perfect," I said, genuinely moved by the thoughtfulness behind the childish creation. "I'll keep it on my desk where I can see it every day." David and Jennifer's gift was more practical, but equally touching. A state-of-the-art electric wheelchair, lightweight and maneuverable, with controls adapted for hands affected by tremor. "This isn't meant to replace walking entirely," Jennifer explained as David demonstrated the chair's features. "But it will give you more independence when fatigue or symptoms make walking too difficult. The battery life is excellent, and it breaks down easily to fit in a car trunk for outings." "It's wonderful," I said, recognizing both the practicality of the gift and the acceptance of my changing needs it represented. "Thank you. This will make a tremendous difference in what I can manage independently." The celebration at Sunny Pines, 2 days later, had a different character, less focused on family ties and more on the connections I'd formed in my new community. Arthur had compiled a small booklet of my writing pieces, professionally printed and bound, titled Reflections, The Architecture of Memory. "It's not the great American novel," he said gruffly as he presented it to me, "but it's damn good work for an amateur." "You have a real voice, Richard. These pieces deserve to be preserved." The rest of the writing group had contributed short reflections on what my participation had meant to them, compiled in the back of the booklet. Reading their words about how my architectural perspective had influenced their own observations, how my willingness to confront difficult truths about aging and illness had given them courage to do the same, brought tears to my eyes. "I had no idea," I said, looking around at the circle of faces that had become so familiar and dear. "Thank you all. This means more than I can express." Vivian's gift was presented privately after the other guests had departed. It was a small wooden box, beautifully crafted with dovetail joints and a smooth satin finish. Opening it, I found a collection of small objects, each seemingly random but clearly selected with purpose. A smooth stone from the Sunny Pines garden, a pressed flower, a ticket stub from a concert we'd attended, a Scrabble tile, the letter V, a tiny sketch of a bird that resembled one of Margaret's porcelain pieces. "A memory box," Vivian explained as I examined each item. "Each represents a moment or aspect of our time together. There's room to add more as we continue creating memories." The thoughtfulness of the gift, its recognition of both our shared past and potential future, moved me deeply. "It's perfect," I said, carefully replacing the items and closing the lid. "Thank you for understanding what matters." "Happy birthday, Richard," she said softly, leaning forward to kiss me gently. "Here's to many more." We both knew the reality behind that wish, that many was unlikely given my diagnosis, that each birthday now was a victory against diminishing odds. But we also understood the importance of hope, of living as if time stretched endlessly ahead even while preparing for its inevitable constraints. As spring advanced toward summer, my focus increasingly turned toward the impending move to David and Jennifer's new home. Construction was proceeding on schedule, with the main structure complete and interior work well underway. The suite designed for me was taking shape, its features carefully planned to accommodate my needs while maintaining aesthetic appeal and harmony with the rest of the house. "We've chosen contrasting colors for the bathroom fixtures," David explained during one of his visits, showing me samples of the materials. "Dark handles and grab bars against light tiles makes them more visible for someone with visual processing issues. And the shower controls are all lever type, easier to manage with tremor." I appreciated both his attention to detail and his matter-of-fact approach to my limitations. There was no pity in his explanations, just practical problem solving. The architect's mindset applied to the specific challenge of creating a living space for someone with Parkinson's. "It looks excellent," I told him, genuinely impressed by the thoughtful design. The perfect balance of accessibility and aesthetics. That was the goal. David smiled, clearly pleased by my approval. A space that works for your needs without screaming medical facility. The looming transition prompted practical considerations beyond the physical space itself. What furniture would I take? What arrangements would be needed for my medical care? How would we handle the shift in family dynamics when I became a daily presence rather than an occasional visitor? We should discuss expectations, I suggested during a family dinner in late May. About privacy, routines, responsibilities. I don't want my presence to disrupt your family life. Jennifer looked surprised. "Richard, we've thought this through carefully. Your suite is designed to give you independence and privacy, with your own entrance and living space. You can interact with the family as much or as little as you're comfortable with." "But practically speaking," I persisted, "things will change. You'll be aware of my comings and goings, my health fluctuations. The children will have constant exposure to my condition, which will inevitably worsen over time. There will be medical equipment, possibly eventually caregivers coming and going. These things impact everyone in the household." David and Jennifer exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years together. "You're right," David acknowledged. "There will be adjustments, but we've discussed this extensively, including with the children. We believe the benefits, for all of us, far outweigh any challenges. The children especially will benefit from having you in their daily lives," Jennifer added. "They'll learn compassion, patience, the value of family bonds that transcend difficulty. These are lessons worth some disruption to routine." Their perspective helped ease my concerns, though I remained conscious of the potential complications my presence would introduce to their household. I resolved to maintain as much independence as possible for as long as possible, to be a positive rather than burdensome presence in my grandchildren's lives. As the move drew closer, I began the process of sorting through my possessions at Sunny Pines, deciding what would come with me to the new space. It was a smaller-scale version of the downsizing I'd done when moving to Sunny Pines initially, but no less emotionally charged. Vivian helped with the sorting, her practical nature balancing my occasional bouts of sentimentality. "You don't need 3 winter sweaters," she pointed out reasonably. "You'll be living in a well-heated home with no need to venture out in cold weather if you don't want to." "But Margaret knitted this one," I objected, holding up a navy cardigan showing distinct signs of wear around the cuffs and elbows. Vivian's expression softened. "Then of course it comes with you. Items with emotional significance are non-negotiable." Working together, we created 3 categories: essentials for daily living, items with significant emotional value, and things that could reasonably be left behind. The process was sometimes painful but ultimately clarifying, forcing me to identify what truly mattered versus what was mere accumulation. "What about our writing group?" I asked Vivian one afternoon as we sorted through my books. "And the men's discussion? I'll miss those connections." "The writing will continue," she assured me. "Arthur already has plans to email you prompts, and you can share your work via email or when I visit." As for the discussions, well, technology makes distance less significant these days. You could participate via video call sometimes. Her confidence that our community connections could be maintained despite physical separation comforted me, though I remained uncertain how well such arrangements would work in practice. Would busy lives and logistical challenges gradually erode these relationships? Would I slowly fade from the consciousness of those who had become important to me at Sunny Pines? July brought a significant medical setback. During a routine physical therapy session, I experienced a sudden, severe drop in blood pressure, a not uncommon side effect of Parkinson's medications, resulting in momentary loss of consciousness and another fall. Though less damaging than my previous fall, this incident led to a brief hospitalization and, more significantly, a reassessment of my ability to continue in independent living at Sunny Pines. "We're concerned about your safety," Dr. Peterson, the medical director, explained during a meeting that included David and Jennifer. "This is the third significant fall in the past year, despite all appropriate precautions. The recommendation from our medical team is a transition to our assisted living section, where staff can monitor you more closely." I had anticipated this eventuality but found the actual recommendation jarring nonetheless. Moving to assisted living within Sunny Pines would mean a smaller living space, more institutional in character. It would mean surrendering even more independence, submitting to regular checks and supervision. "What's the timeline for this transition?" David asked, his expression carefully neutral. "Ideally within the next 30 days, Dr. Peterson replied. "We have a room available now, but we understand such moves take time to arrange." David glanced at me, then back to the doctor. "Our new home will be ready for occupancy in approximately 6 weeks. My father's suite is specifically designed for his needs, with accessibility features and proximity to family support. Would it be possible to maintain his current apartment until then, perhaps with additional in-home services in the interim?" Dr. Peterson considered this proposal. "It might be possible, with certain adjustments. We could increase aid visits to 3 times daily instead of morning and evening only. We would need to implement a check-in system, perhaps a call button. He wears at all times." "I'm sitting right here," I interjected, irritation overcoming restraint. "Please don't discuss me as if I'm not present or capable of participating in decisions about my own care." Both men had the grace to look abashed. "You're absolutely right, Mr. Maitland," Dr. Peterson said. "I apologize for my insensitivity. What are your thoughts about these options?" I took a deep breath, consciously calming myself before responding. "I understand the concerns about my safety. The falls are frightening for everyone, myself included. But moving twice in such a short period seems unnecessarily disruptive. If additional services can be arranged to bridge the gap until David's house is ready, that would be my strong preference." Dr. Peterson nodded. "I think we can work with that, provided you agree to certain safety measures. The call button I mentioned? Removal of any remaining fall hazards in your apartment, possibly a bed alarm that alerts staff if you get up unassisted during the night. Those conditions are acceptable." I agreed, relieved to have maintained some agency in the decision, even if the underlying reality, that independent living was no longer viable for me, remained unavoidable. After the meeting, David stayed behind to discuss practical arrangements. "Are you okay, Dad?" he asked once we were alone. "This is a lot to process." "I'm processing," I replied, not entirely truthfully. The reality was that I felt overwhelmed, caught in a rapidly accelerating downward spiral of declining health and diminishing independence. "The timing is actually fortunate. If your house weren't nearly ready, I'd be facing a move to assisted, living here with no end date." "True," David acknowledged. "And the suite really is perfect for your needs, better than anything Sunny Pines can offer, I think. More privacy, more personal space, and family right there when you need us." I nodded, grateful for his enthusiasm even as I worried about the implications of becoming dependent on my son and his family. "How do you think the children will adjust to having me there full-time, especially given my health challenges?" David considered the question seriously. "There will be an adjustment. Period, certainly. But they already understand more than you might think. Emma's research project on Parkinson's gave her a solid understanding of what to expect. Michael is naturally empathetic, though he sometimes hides it behind boyish bravado. And Sophie, well, you know Sophie. She takes everything in stride." "And Jennifer?" I pressed. "This will impact her significantly, having an aging father-in-law with increasing care needs in her home." "Jennifer was the one who first suggested the suite," David revealed, surprising me. "After your hospitalization last year, She raised the possibility before I did. She's concerned about you, Dad, and wants you where we can support you properly. This information eased some of my anxiety. If the initiative had come from Jennifer rather than solely from David's sense of filial obligation, perhaps the arrangement truly could work for everyone involved. When I shared the developments with Vivian later that day, her reaction was characteristically practical. "This accelerates the timeline but doesn't change the fundamental plan," she observed. "And it's certainly better than moving to assisted living here only to move again in a few weeks." "It makes everything more real," I said, struggling to articulate the complex emotions the situation evoked. "More immediate. There's no more pretending that I might continue as I am indefinitely." Vivian reached for my hand, her touch grounding me as always. "No more pretending," she agreed gently. "But maybe that's not entirely bad. Accepting reality allows us to work with it rather than against it, to find the best path forward within the constraints we can't change." "When did you get so wise?" I asked, attempting humor to lighten the moment. "Tuesday last," she replied, promptly. It arrived with the morning mail, along with my AARP magazine and a coupon for denture adhesive. Her ability to joke about aging, to find humor in our shared predicament, was one of the things I valued most about her. Vivian never denied the difficulties we faced, but she refused to be defeated by them, to surrender joy and laughter to the encroachment of physical limitation. "I'm going to miss you terribly," I admitted, voicing the concern that underlay all others. "Once I move to David's, everything changes between us." "Some things will change," she corrected gently. "The frequency of our contact, the setting of our interactions, but not the essential nature of our relationship, not what we mean to each other." "You'll visit?" I asked, hating the neediness in my voice but unable to suppress it. "Of course. I'll visit, often, and you'll come back here sometimes too, for writing group or special events. We'll make it work, Richard." I wanted to believe her, to trust that our connection could withstand geographical separation and my increasing physical limitations. But doubt lingered, a shadow across the future I could neither dismiss nor fully examine. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur of preparations, medical appointments, and conversations with residents and staff at Sunny Pines who had become important to me. Arthur helped organize a special session of the writing group focused on themes of transition and new beginnings, providing an opportunity for me to express my complex feelings about the impending move through the safer medium of creative work. Facility staff, especially those who had cared for me directly, offered good wishes tinged with professional assessment of what support I might need in my new setting. Melissa from admissions stopped by with information about services in the community where David and Jennifer lived, should my family need additional resources beyond what they could provide directly. "You've made a real impression here," she told me during this visit. "Not everyone who comes to Sunny Pines engages so fully with community life. You'll be missed." The men's discussion group insisted on a proper send-off, organizing an outing to a local steakhouse where we enjoyed good food and better conversation, ranging far beyond the polite well-wishes typical of such occasions to tackle substantive topics as we always had in our regular meetings. "Don't become a stranger," Frank instructed as we were leaving. "We expect reports on your new living situation, architectural assessment, family dynamics, the works." "I'll do my best," I promised, touched by their genuine interest in my ongoing welfare and experiences. Most meaningful of all was the time spent with Vivian, each day taking on the bittersweet quality of something precious and fleeting. We visited all our favorite spots around Sunny Pines: the garden bench where we'd shared morning coffee, the small library nook where we'd discovered a mutual love of mystery novels, the corner of the dining room we'd claimed as ours through regular occupation. "We're not saying goodbye to these places," Vivian reminded me during one such visit. "Just acknowledging their significance in our story. You'll be back here, and I'll be visiting you in your new home. The settings change, but the narrative continues. Her perspective helped me frame the transition in more positive terms. Not an ending, but an evolution. Not loss, but transformation. Still, on the evening before my scheduled departure, emotion overcame philosophical acceptance. I don't know if I can do this, I confessed as we sat in my nearly emptied apartment, surrounded by packed boxes and bare walls. Leave everything familiar, become dependent on my family, start over yet again at 75. Vivian regarded me steadily, her blue eyes reflecting both compassion and challenge. Of course you can do this, she said firmly. You've already navigated challenges that would have broken a lesser person. This is just another adaptation, another demonstration of your remarkable resilience. What if my family comes to resent my presence? What if I become nothing but a burden, a source of stress and disruption? Richard, Vivian said gently, I've seen your family with you. The love there is genuine and deep. Yes, there will be difficult days, moments of frustration on both sides, but the foundation is solid. Trust that. As always, her practical wisdom steadied me, providing a counterweight to my anxiety. We spent the rest of the evening reminiscing about our time together at Sunny Pines, laughing at shared memories, occasionally lapsing into comfortable silence filled with unspoken emotion. When it was time for her to leave, Sunny Pines still maintained nominal visiting hours, though they were often flexible for residents visiting each other. She held me tightly, her embrace communicating what words could not fully express. This isn't goodbye, she whispered fiercely. It's just until next time. I nodded against her shoulder, not trusting my voice to remain steady. When she finally pulled away, her eyes were bright with unshed tears, but her smile was determined. I'll see you on Saturday, she said. I've already arranged to visit once you're settled in. David gave me the address and suggested lunchtime would be good. Saturday, I repeated, clinging to the concrete plan as a lifeline across the transition. I'll be counting the hours. After she left, I sat alone in the apartment that had been my home for nearly 2 years, surrounded by the visible signs of imminent departure. The space looked strange in its emptiness, already transitioning from my home to a vacant apartment awaiting its next occupant. Most of my personal items had been packed for transport to David's house. Clothes, books, the writing desk Vivian had often sat at during our visits, Margaret's bird collection, family photographs. The accumulated artifacts of a long life now condensed into a surprisingly small volume of boxes and bags. In the morning, David and Michael arrived to supervise the moving process. Professional movers handled the furniture and heavier items, while David, Michael, and I managed the more personal belongings that required careful attention. Is this everything, Grandpa? Michael asked, surveying the assembled boxes with surprise. It doesn't seem like very much. It's everything I need, I told him, appreciating his perspective. To a child, the material accumulation of 75 years probably seemed like it should fill a warehouse rather than a small moving van. The older you get, the more you realize how little you actually need to be content. But what about all your other stuff? From your old house, I mean? Most of it was sold or given away when I moved to Sunny Pines, I explained. Furniture, kitchen things, tools, all went to people who could use them. Some special items went to your father or other family members. The really important things came with me, and they'll come to the new house too. Michael nodded, processing this information. So you don't miss the stuff you got rid of? Sometimes I miss specific items that had special memories attached, I admitted. But mostly, no. Physical possessions are just things. What matters are the relationships, the experiences, the memories you carry inside you. That's a perspective more people should adopt, David commented, overhearing our conversation as he re-entered the apartment. Our culture puts too much emphasis on accumulation and not enough on experience and connection. Exactly, I agreed, pleased that my son had internalized values I'd tried to model throughout his upbringing. Though I recognize the irony of this philosophical position coming from someone who spent his career designing physical structures. David smiled. But you always emphasized that buildings matter because of how they shape human experience and interaction, not as objects in themselves. That's influenced my entire approach to architecture. This observation touched me deeply. The recognition that my professional values had been transmitted to the next generation, albeit with David's own interpretation and evolution of the principles. It was yet another reminder that legacy existed in more meaningful forms than material inheritance. The actual departure from Sunny Pines was both more and less emotional than I had anticipated. A small group gathered to see me off: Arthur, Frank, and several other friends from the writing and discussion groups. Facility staff stopped by with well wishes, including Melissa from admissions and Alicia, my physical therapist, who had prepared written instructions for continuing my exercise regimen in the new setting. Vivian was notably absent, having said her temporary goodbye the previous evening. We had agreed that a public farewell would be too difficult for both of us, that our relationship deserved the privacy of that quieter, more intimate parting. "Ready, Dad?" David asked when the moving van was loaded and the last goodbyes had been said. I looked back at the building that had been my home, thinking of all that had transpired within its walls, the initial resistance and resentment, the gradual acceptance, the unexpected friendships, the late-blooming relationship with Vivian that had transformed my experience of aging and illness from mere endurance to something approaching grace. "Yes," I said finally, turning toward David's waiting car. "I'm ready." The journey to my new home marked both an ending and a beginning, a threshold between what had been and what would be. As we drove away from Sunny Pines, I felt the weight of the transition, the losses inherent in change, the uncertainty of new circumstances, the letting go of established patterns and relationships. But alongside those natural concerns ran a current of cautious optimism, a willingness to embrace whatever this next chapter might bring. David's new house, when we arrived, exceeded even my expectations. Situated on a generously sized corner lot in an established neighborhood, the structure managed to be both distinctly modern and harmoniously integrated with its more traditional surroundings. The single-story design, while practical for accessibility, avoided the sprawling, amorphous quality that often characterized ranch-style homes, instead presenting a thoughtfully articulated facade with varying roof heights and recessed sections creating visual interest. "What do you think?" David asked anxiously as we pulled into the driveway. "I know it's very different from the Hamilton house." "It's magnificent," I said sincerely. "Beautifully proportioned, excellent material choices, sensitive to context, while still making its own statement. You've outdone yourself, son." His face lit up at the professional validation. "Wait until you see the interior. We've incorporated natural light throughout, with clear-story windows and strategic skylights. And the flow between spaces works even better than I hoped." Inside, the house revealed itself as a masterwork of contemporary residential design. Open yet articulated spaces, abundant natural light, warm materials balancing the modern lines, thoughtful details that elevated the everyday experience of inhabiting the space. Jennifer and the children greeted us enthusiastically, eager to show me every feature of their new home. "Your suite is this way, Grandpa," Emma said, taking my arm to guide me while Michael walked ahead, already narrating the tour. "You have your own entrance right here," he explained, pointing to a door that opened onto a small covered porch, "and inside is a little kitchen area and then your bedroom, and a super cool bathroom with all these special features Dad designed." The suite exceeded my expectations in every way. David had created a space that perfectly balanced my need for assistance with my desire for dignity and independence. The kitchenette was small but functional, with countertops at wheelchair height, easily operated appliances, and storage within reach from a seated position. The bedroom accommodated both a hospital-style bed, disguised with handsome woodwork, to look like a normal platform bed, and comfortable seating for visitors. The bathroom was a triumph of accessible design, with a curbless shower, strategically placed grab bars that doubled as towel racks, and fixtures selected for both ease of use and aesthetic appeal. Most impressive was the outdoor space, a private patio accessible directly from my bedroom, sheltered by a pergola already supporting young climbing plants, bordered by raised planters filled with flowers and herbs. The area offered both privacy and connection, with a gate leading to the main backyard where I could watch the children play while still having my own separate retreat. "This is extraordinary," I told David, genuinely moved by the thought and care evident in every detail. "You've managed to create a space that addresses practical needs without ever feeling institutional or medical. It's a gift beyond measure." "We want you to be comfortable here," Jennifer said, joining us on the patio. "To feel that this